Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this decision meeting for Culture and City Development. I'm Councillor Steve Pett. I'm the Cabinet Member for Culture and City Development. But a housekeeping before we start. The meeting is live streamed, so if any of the there we go. If anyone doesn't wish to be filmed, then they need to say so. And please be aware that there's a fixed point at the back of the room where that happens. I think that's in the introduction bit. Also, the press will be present for the meeting today. There isn't a planned fire alarm, so if the fire alarm does sound, we need to all exit the building and meet by the Queen Victoria statue. Have I forgotten anything, Anna? No, good. Excellent. So we'll start with some introductions. I'll go around the room to my left.
I'm Councillor Claire UD, and I'm supposed to say that I'm the spokesperson for my group.
Yeah.
Oh, for the Progressive Portsmouth People Group.
Councillor Stephen Morgan, Labour Group representative.
Chris Richards, Community Projects Officer in Culture and City Development.
Kim Pellett, SME Development Officer for Economic Growth, representing Ian Maguire.
Claire Looney, Commissioning and Partnership Manager.
Laura Weston, Conan Doyle, Outreach and Education Officer.
Sue Page, Finance.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Thank you, everyone. We do have apologies today from Councillor Linda Symes, who's the Conservative spokesperson. She's had a veterinary emergency. I hope everything's all right. Okay, so over to the agenda. Any declarations of interest, members?
None.
Thank you very much. So the first item we have today is item 3, and that's the crowdfunding platform for Portsmouth City. And over to Kim.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to provide the background information on the concept of crowdfunding platform and to really propose the opportunity to establish a crowdfunding platform for Portsmouth City, which will focus on supporting business startups and SMEs, thereby assisting the growth of the local economy. The report asks that the Cabinet Member notes the range of crowdfunding platforms currently available and also to note that match funding is required to establish the new platform, which could be used to support successful business projects on this platform that is dedicated for Portsmouth. The report is therefore seeking approval from the Cabinet Member for the budget required to establish a new platform at £30,000 and for the match funding element of £40,000 from the portfolio reserve. The report also seeks approval for the match funding to be used for projects that deliver outcomes in support of the Council's economic growth and regeneration strategy, with the allocation of funding to projects delegated to the Director of Regeneration in consultation with the portfolio holder. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Members' questions? Stephen?
Thank you, Kim, for your presentation. You mention in the report the importance of the community infrastructure levy, and obviously crowdfunding could help lever in funding so that we maximise the value of that funding. I can't see mention in the report, though, about the voluntary sector, social enterprise and not-for-profit sector. How do you see them being involved in this platform?
Thank you for your question. My apologies for the mention of SIL. This report has been in the making of some months, so it has changed quite a lot over these months. The change from SIL to now funding from the PRED Reserve is purely for the business startups and SMEs. The SIL funding, when that becomes available, is currently being reviewed. When that becomes available, will be more supporting of the voluntary and community type organisations and very much focused on the infrastructural type of developments and regeneration projects. So the SIL mention is slightly confusing, so my apologies for that. However, in the long term, when the SIL funding is and the process is confirmed and available, that will run parallel to this project funding for businesses on the platform. if that makes sense.
Can I clarify a bit for you? So the initial look at this was through PRED, but I've been really clear that there are massive opportunities for this across the council. So in terms of SIL funding, if a ward member or members agreed that there was a project in their ward that they wanted to support, and that could be a social enterprise, voluntary community sector, any kind of project really, and that doesn't sit within the £40,000 allocation, which is particularly around PRED development work, that could still happen. But the process by which it happens still needs to be finalised for the SIL process. So that's basically what Kim's saying. So in terms of the money that's been allocated here, if this had been done earlier, it would have been the sort of thing that I would have, the package free larder type proposal, because it's got good social outcomes, but is also a small local business that we might want to back. And there could be other examples like that. But Culture and Leisure could consider going in with ward members and saying, okay, we can put in a little bit, ward members can add to it, and there's this community project. So I think there's an awful lot more than we've got at this stage, but until we go out to procurement and actually get somebody appointed, we'll need to bring another paper back at that point to say, now that we've got this agreement, here's the full scope of what it could mean across the council. Does that make more sense?
So just to be absolutely clear, the new crowdfunding platform will be a vehicle for the voluntary sector to fundraise for local projects?
Absolutely, definitely. The example that has been referred to is Plymouth. They put about, I think, 60,000 in, turned into 420,000. I think the figures have even gone up on that now. So there's lots of opportunities here. This is a vehicle for getting it in place through PRED. It's not the end of the story by any means. Claire?
What companies are going to be applying for tender? Do you know? Or like, just reel me off a list.
No, thank you. Well, because of the time pressures in getting this off the ground, we've already started the tendering process, and we're in the final stages of that. So I can say that we've had 3 interests from companies to procure, to contract with this. But at this point, I can't reveal the names. So, we're obviously waiting for the approval for the funding before we finalise and inform the bidders and contract with the successful bidder.
Okay, any more questions? Comment from Sue?
Can I just clarify on paragraph 15.2, just to make it clear, the delegation that already exists from the City Council is the portfolio holder in conjunction with the Section 151 officer approves releases from portfolio reserve. Is that okay?
Yes, and we ought to note that because it's not clear in the report. Mr. Ward's been edited out, and we edit him back in. Claire? Yeah.
Could I give a comment, please?
Of course.
I don't know who's been asked to put out to tender what companies have gone forward, but and I know we seek to go to maybe the cheapest option, but I don't know if you look at people that that have been dealing with how they deal with workers' rights within their company, and one company, Kickstart, I don't know if they've applied or not, have been in international press in the last week because they've been refusing to recognise a union of sacked high-ranking members that have been trying to organise. So I was like, if that's happening and they're in the process, maybe just look into like the ethicalness of some companies. Thank you. Cheers.
Duly noted. Okay. Any other comments on this, then, members? Excellent. So the main, as Kim said, the main reason for bringing it forward quickly is it's been kicking around for quite a while, and I was keen that we get on with it rather than drag our feet any longer and get the procurement process, because if we'd waited to do anything, then it'd go on for several more months. Yes, we first had discussions about it a year ago, so I just want to get on with it and make sure we've got something in place. I'm very happy for members to feed into the process about how we can make it as successful as possible. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks, Kim. All recommendations accepted. So, item 4, Claire Looney on seafront decorative festoon lighting.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. You'll be very aware, I'm sure, that the festoon lighting on the seafront is very much loved by residents and visitors to the city. But the reality is it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. It's a very old system. a number of seafronts, especially across the south and southwest of England, have replaced their festoon lighting with more up-to-date systems. But for example, they can't take LED lights. They are very exposed to very harsh environmental conditions, as the wind and weather last weekend would have clearly demonstrated. What we're seeking to do through this report is, if you like, bring to attention our intention to run a small pilot scheme to trial some new lighting. The area we're looking to do this in would be in Avenue de Caen, which is a bespoke area. It also doesn't include any of the listed lighting columns. So a number of the lighting columns are listed along the seafront, which I rightly wouldn't want to trial anything new with, because I need to make sure we're keeping the Conservation Officer very happy. But we are aware that the system currently is becoming increasingly costly to maintain and replace and keep into a standard of good repair. We're increasingly getting catenary wiring breaking, resulting in lights hanging down, not working, timer switches get covered in salt inside, therefore the lighting areas and big strips don't work. It would be fair to say it's one of the areas that the public let us know about on a very regular basis, and I would really like to try something which we think is more reliable and also allows us to look at energy efficiency savings as well amongst those, because it's not an uncostly scheme to run. We would like to do it in Avenue de Caen because it's a bespoke area and we can trial some stuff down there on its own. And really this report is just flagging up the fact that we're about to go into the winter. I'm about to expect numbers of areas of lighting to fail again, and we are conscious that the public won't be happy with that. We want to try and preempt that as best we can, and really to ask for us to be allowed to undertake a pilot scheme once I've identified the money, which I'm also hoping to get some external money for to trial. We would want a trial to run for at least a year because it needs to do a whole year's worth of weather. And once it's up, I'd actually quite like it to be bad weather for a while, which I know is unusual for me on the seafront, because I need to see how it works, see how it operates. We're very conscious, though, that this can be quite a contentious issue. We've been watching with a lot of interest how Weymouth's replacement lighting system has been both polarising its community in terms of loving and hating it. It's a bit of a Marmite option there. And we want to make sure that we've fully consulted. We're very also aware of how impacting it might be for people's perception of public safety in the area, visual impairment issues and things like that. So there are a number of groups who would want to ensure that once a pilot scheme is up and running, that they were fully consulting with. So it's really a flag to say, we'd like permission to run a pilot scheme. I can't yet give you the details of when it would be and what it would be. It's still a work in progress, where we're looking also for specialist lighting systems that can work in our lovely but rather harsh environment on the seafront. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Members?
Thank you, Claire, for your report. And just to stress, obviously, that this is something that the public raise quite regularly with the council. Could you just set out a bit more the consultation you envisage as part of the pilot?
What we'd like to do is, once we feel we have some pilot options to trial, we would like to take those out and fully have a process with members, the public, so they can see. We might trial different types of lighting in different parts of Avenue de Caen. We'd like to get a public feedback process. We want to try it especially in the winter months when it's darker, so that's why we also want quite a lengthy period of time for trialling it and getting public feedback. I hope we would have various methods of online feedback processes, as well as people down there to take people's feedback, especially if they're out walking the dogs, that sort of thing, how the people feel about it. I'll be completely honest and say I've not fully designed up in my head quite how that consultation will work, but it's completely integral to the pilot scheme, and that's the whole reason why it's a pilot scheme. Also because we want to make sure it's an affordable model that we go forward with. It's going to be enduring for the conditions that are down there and really reflects that public feedback. We are also aware that we might want to treat different parts of the seafront slightly differently. So for example, Canoe Lake, as a heritage park area around the lake, might have a different treatment, for example, than other parts of the seafront where, for example, in front of Castle Field, along those bits where you've got quite heavy overhanging trees, you might want different types of lighting to reflect different areas and conditions of those spaces. I don't necessarily think there'll be one size fits all, but that's also what we want to try in the consultation with the public.
Okay.
So just to add then, obviously, strategically, I think it's very important that we think about this project with the Sea Defence scheme and the public realm improvements that we will all see. So just could you say a bit more about that, please?
Our understanding of the plans on the Sea Defence scheme is that currently they would only take out the lighting and replace it back in, which would be, I think, somewhat underwhelming. There are no schemes for the lighting to be enhanced in any way other than practical street lighting enhancements with the scheme. So the festoon is an add-on, which is our because it's decorative lighting, it doesn't serve a practical function, therefore it's not an engineering solution to that isn't required within the coastal defences. That being said, I'm working very closely with the coastal defences. They will obviously have a lighting scheme to that plan. At the moment, though, we haven't got the full details because they've only just appointed the designers doing the detailed stages, so it's a bit of a hand-in-glove work. What we want to do is trial some options in Avenue de Con, where we will then have the evidence for how it works in the environment we've got, making sure that it's suitable, and they could also then be proposed into the scheme as well.
Just to add to that, we did have a cross-party briefing on sea defences this week, but for whatever reason, the other members who were on that couldn't attend. So I've asked for them to be updated in writing as a result of that. And part of the discussion that we had was once the planning application has been approved, hopefully, for the sea defence works, then we'll move to the second round of consultation for that project, which will include a wide stakeholder engagement. We've got the Stakeholders Advisory Group, which is various bits of community groups and businesses and everyone from the voluntary lifeguards to the rowing club who are at those meetings, and this is the sort of thing that will feed into that, because we need to move to, we now know we've got a planning application, but we also need to be very aware that the public are very interested in what all this is actually going to look like in terms of the lamp columns, the benches, access for different groups, with user groups with different needs, from disabilities to pedestrians to cyclists, and this could lock into that process very effectively. So I can see that group being engaged with this in a meaningful way, and that might be our route into the wider public consultation that we do as well. So, Claire, anything?
I look forward to our gloriously sunny winter.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, that's approved, Claire. Thank you. And then Laura, item 5, the Arthur Conan Doyle collection.
Councillor Pitt, sorry, do you mind if I introduce it, and then Laura's going to talk about specifics, because we suspect there'll be some questions wanting lots more detail that Laura carries in her head other than I do.
I definitely don't mind.
The purpose of the report really is to highlight that next year, 2020, marks the 100th anniversary of Conan Doyle's endorsement, I don't think I go as far as to say belief, of the Cottony Fairies photographs. So we want to do some bids for further funding in order to help both mark the elements around the Cottony fairies that we have in the Conan Doyle collection, but also to build on the exemplary work that we've been doing with visual impairment communities, and also through the Summer of Sherlock seasons that are just finishing. So I asked Laura if she'd come along today, perhaps give more information about those Summer of Sherlock seasons, which have literally just completed, and we've just had those informations. But we're looking at fairies, magic, legends and trickery, which, if I'm honest, could also go into the whole thing about fakeness, fake news, how information is transmuted into something different, which obviously is very current and relevant at the moment.
So, to clarify, obviously everything that we have, it's a very sensitive issue in the city, and there's spiritualist churches in the city, so I think we need to be really aware to respect their wishes and to respect their religion. So we would be looking at the facts that within the collection we have a very large section on spiritualism that includes about 500 images of spirit phenomena, and it is about showcasing that part of the collection respectfully, but also kind of looking at the history of Conan Doyle's kind of life and his background. So we would look at kind of workshops for children and families, and then we would go all the way through to looking at the much deeper and darker elements. From Summer of Sherlock, for instance, we've done a lot of piloting and a lot of work around science, which has been really interesting, and there's been a real uptake and a lot of interest in the science elements, and it would be good to kind of showcase that. So it would also feed into H.G. Wells and other authors that were based in the city, and we can kind of really hit those key targets really. So, you know, we can do English, we can do maths, we can really kind of get to grips with it.
Thank you, Laura. Members' questions? No? Do you think there'll be an opportunity to link across to the Helen Duncan story as well as part of this? Because I directed a play about her a few years ago that was written by 2 local writers, and I was amazed at the interest. Sold out performances from people, the feedback where there was a symposium at the university rolled into it.
Was that with Stuart Lesker?
It certainly was.
I was there. Yes, absolutely. So I think looking at past projects that we have done with spiritualism, it has a massive uptake. We've already got a couple of things planned that have rolled over from Summer of Sherlock. So as part of Bookfest, we have our science guy coming back, and he will be doing a look at in Sherlock's mind. And we're also doing a little bit more controversial, but I think it'll be really good fun. So he's going to look at spiritualism, but in a Derren Brown type way. And we're anticipating really large audience numbers for that, specifically going from past experiences of other performances and plays. So I think we will, what I would like to do is just completely go mad and look at every kind of link. Sorry, technical term. To go mad on every single aspect of spiritualism, and go into science, go into kind of the history of Portsmouth's past, etc., etc.
Thank you, Laura. The recommendation is approved with the addition that you have permission to go mad. Okay, that brings us to the item 6, which is the first quarter monitoring.
Thank you. This is the first quarter monitoring, which is the forecast position predicted as at June, so it's a little bit out of date now. And it's also in the new format for this portfolio, which includes planning and economic development areas that were formerly in PRED. The overall forecast at the quarter one was for 232,000 overspend on this portfolio, and at the time the key area was in conjunction with the planning fee income and the drop caused by potentially the nitrate issue and other related issues. Now we do expect that position to change, and I am aware the Director of Regeneration is working on resolving these variances. As we previously have said, any net overspend on the portfolio at the year end is the first call on the portfolio reserve, but in this instance it will be the former PRED portfolio reserve. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Members' questions? No? Okay, yep, noted, and I've raised it specifically with the AD as well around that, and he's confident that once we start to work through the backlog on the nitrates that the position will slowly correct itself. I've said I'd be much happier if it more quickly corrected itself, so we'll see where we end up. Item 7 then, Community Centres report on the 2018 surveys, and that's Chris Richards.
Thank you, Councillor. This is an information report rather than anything else, but it's a report on an exercise that we carry out every 2 years in the community centres in culture, in order to check that they're doing what they should be doing and that they're delivering for the people of Portsmouth what they should be delivering. Can I make a pre-sort of caveat? You'll note on page 1 that 3.1 it says that the housing, a number of community centres sit in housing. They're not managed by community associations, but are directly managed by the housing department. And I've made the point that they didn't take part. I yesterday had a communication from the head of housing, who was not aware that the offer had been refused. It had been refused by the officer who was at that time in charge. So I think it's in fairness just to log that the head of housing was not aware that his centres had been excluded. So the first section just actually explains how the process is worked out, and then for each of the community centres, community associations receives a report. It receives copies so that it's circulated across the whole of the committee, so that they can actually then just have a look at what's happening in their centres and identify any weaknesses. And the weaknesses might be around the demographics of the users, or they might be around the richness of the programme. In fact, the overall sort of findings are quite, well, I would say very satisfying, in the sense that it's clear that the vast majority of the people using our community centres are local residents for whom they're intended, and where there is use by people outside of the city, it's quite frequently sort of minority group cultural events, which is obviously attracts people from the region, which is, it's good and healthy. There is an analysis. The second part of the report is a collective data summary, which explains not only the process but the meaning of the various headings, etc. These reports obviously exist for individual centres if anybody would like a copy. I'm not sure whether there are any questions.
Members?
Just a couple of things. Just wanted to say that I think the diversity that we're seeing at our community centres is excellent. I think the strength of our community centres is in part down to the volunteers and staff that work there. And I just wondered how you do or could recognise the contributions that community centres make and thank volunteers for what they do.
You mean me personally or the council collectively? As far as I'm aware, there's not been much nomination of volunteers in community centres into the kind of recognition of volunteers, which the city does actually carry out sort of, on a regular basis. So maybe that's something we could have a look at and put forward.
Certainly a good point. Just to note that the council did recognise the very long-standing commitment of the late Eddie Salt to Buckland Community Centre, and he was presented with a civic award shortly before he sadly passed away. And it is important that we do recognise people who've given very long contributions to which make such a difference. I mean, it speaks volumes that 0.51% of people express dissatisfaction, and that shows that when the council can work effectively with voluntary and community sector, that actually the outcomes can be really significant. And a lot of people see these centres as a vital part of their day-to-day lives, and that's really important for us. So thank you, and yes, good point, Stephen. Claire, anything? Use your mic.
On page 61, it's only said that one person responded from Cosham. Is there any reason? 61 about the respondents from individual community centres. It said that only one person responded from Cosham and all the others are in the hundreds. Do you know why that might have been?
Cosham Community Centre was not included in the process because
they stopped,
it's now managed directly by hand.
So one person filled it in before they were told not to.
Well, occasionally what's happened is that individuals have, say, for example, Highbury Community Centre is in Cosham Ward, and some of the returns that came back from Highbury, obviously I get them as a bundle and it's quite clear they are from Highbury, it will say Cosham.
Okay, so it says like Havelock responded. Is that not run by, is that run by a community association now? Okay. Ignore me.
Yeah, Havelock Community Centre has always been run by a voluntary association, yeah. And that's one of the centres which until very recently had absolutely no paid staff other than the cleaner.
Yeah, no, they're unbelievable what they managed to achieve, and it's as I would know, it's in my patch. Any further comments? In that case, could we add to the report our thanks to the staff and volunteers for their ongoing commitment to the centres, and say that thank you comes from all of us. And if there's no further questions, thank you very much, Chris. That's duly noted and accepted. Peter Ashley Activity Centre is item 8. You don't need to stay if you don't want to. So if you want to escape, Chris, you can. Peter Ashley Activity Centre. That's Claire.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. This is really just, as it says, an information update for members that the tender process around the repairs of the historic bridges at the fort has been completed, and the preferred route will be to support the delivery of the work for the schemes through a tripartite agreement involving Historic England, ourselves and the Peter Ashley Activity Centres. So it's really just to let members know that initial tender work has been completed, there's an option on the table, and we're just working through the ramifications behind the scenes of how and what that might look like. So I appreciate it's some considerable time since we bought the original report.
Thank you, Claire. Members, any questions? No? Okay, then duly noted. Thank you very much. And that concludes today's meeting. Thank you all.